My name is Dylan, and I have been telling street stories for over 15 years. I usually talk to the kids or young adults who are at risk of drug abuse and peer pressure. I start off with a series of fast-paced escapades, which lead some kids into changing their traditional playground of gangs into something positive. My stories follow their adventures from selling or using drugs and alcohol. This helped them to become entrepreneurs, choreographers, and songwriters. Also sports managers, and military special forces, even investigative detectives. Raw Productions, Reach Out and Witness Productions presents Hoodzville Rap. Written and produced by Larry W. Keys. This movie is about peer pressure and its consequences. Some people never have to go through it. But there are some who go through it and wish they didn't have to. It takes all types of people to become a role model, depending on the situation, time, and age. The setting, plot, and characters of this movie have been chosen by circumstances of living in a drug-infested city. I'm not here to glorify the situation but only to identify the situation. Because it's one thing to live it and another to survive it. Hello, and welcome to Hoodzville Stories again. This time they had a little more heart than before. Remember, you have to have heart to be a gangster because of jails, institutions, or death. I see a few people have not come back. But it's okay. We know only the strong survive. And you guys are survivors, that's why I will be praying for the others to return safely. I'm about to start up part 2 shortly. But first let's go back to where the crew left off at. 2 weeks later. They were still trying to figure out their next move before Silky find out who they are. Jim was looking out of his window when he saw Chink come running across the street. As Chink entered the side of the building, Jim was putting on his pants. By the time Chink hit the door, Jim was picking his afro out. The door swung open, Jim was walking down the hallway toward the front door. Jim's mother turned around from the refrigerator, put her hands on her hips and started patting her left foot. She looked younger than most women her age. Her brown house coat hid her light brown skin frame from view. You could still see the womanly curves of her body. That let you know that she still had a sexy body along with her natural curly brownish red hair. Chink put on brakes, like he had stopped on a dime making skid marks, put it, his body, in reverse. Then saying, "I'm sorry Miss Dottie, I'm sorry." He went back out the door backwards with a silly grin on his face for being caught. Jim laughed inside as he said, "Good morning Mom." She just rolled her eyes at him and went back to the refrigerator. Chink knocked on the door this time and Jim answered the door, then they left. "Man, today is Saturday, what your problem Jim? I just saw the bill collector go up the road." Jim said, "Damn Jack. Don't worry, we'll catch him down the bottom. But first, we got to see if Jeff will let us hold a rod. Rodsko, gun." They walked toward the apartments over by the school where Jeff lived. Jeff was hip to them youngsters to the point where he would get a cut off of every sting, robbery, they did. It turned out for him to become a big business in that area of Hoodzville. There was only one catch to it, and he made it pretty clear. Every time a youngster would borrow a rod, they had to bring it back even if the sting went down or not. Jeff wore glasses sometimes, he was slim, and had about 100 stitches across his chest, his stomach, neck, and face. They say he got stabbed up in Boys Village by 5 dudes because he wouldn't snitch on his crew. They knew he could fight good. So they banked him, more than 2 guys beating up on one guy. He survived the fight and caused a riot up in there. When they got to Jeff's apartment, knock, knock. "Let me knock because I know he's in there. Man, you know I want a blast this morning before we go to the dog fights," Chink said in an angry, impatient voice. Jim looked at Chink with his small beady eyes and smiled. "Knock knock." This time much louder, harder. "This better be good," a voice said from the other side of the door. Jim backed up beside Chink and whispered, "If he swing on me man, we gonna bank his bad butt? Chink said, okay Jim, I've wanted to kick his bad butt anyway. Jim looked at Chink and said, you're right. Then they both laughed. What up dudes? A voice said as the door opened up. Jeff was about 6 feet tall, 180 pounds and slim, with a part in the middle of his afro. He wore a gold medallion around his neck, with a picture of a beautiful woman in the middle of it. People say it was his mom's, because she abandoned him at the age of 3. He's had a bit of an attitude problem ever since those foster care days. Jeff looked down at them and said, "Little Mickey," in a rough scratchy voice. "I loaned you a rod last week and you didn't even fire the damn thing." Then he laughed. "Ha ha ha." Chink said, "Look, you gonna loan us the..." He stopped as Jim spoke up, "Yeah, this time I'll kill the dude." Jeff laughed and said, "Be with you in a minute." Then he smiled as he shut the door, leaving them in the hallway. "Hey Chink, man, when we talk to dudes like this, let me do the talking, okay?" Chink held out his hand and Jim gave him a 5 slap on his hand to acknowledge him. Jeff came back with 2 rods, a .32 automatic and a .32 revolver. Jim and Chink looked at each other. Jim grabbed the revolver, turned to walk away as he checked the revolver for bullets, then he said, "And my name ain't no damn Little Mickey, chump." Jeff just laughed as he shut the door. Chink said, "Man, you crazy." Jim said, "No, he's the one crazy. You know, if I fired that automatic that it wouldn't have stopped till all the bullets ran out. Just one little pull on the trigger could really be death for someone. If I pull the trigger on this revolver," as he eyed it while putting it in his dip with his mug broken down, "at least I'd do the time for something I know I did, instead of hitting everything in sight because I be just spraying bullets." Chink said, "Oh yeah, you right, I didn't think of that, cause then he'd have a rep that you killed someone." Jim said, "Man, he'd kill us if we told that it was his gun." Chink said, "Oh yeah, for real." Then they both laughed as they walked and checked the time of day. "Let's roll to the bottom," Chink said. And they start trotting in that direction. By the time they got to the bottom, they passed Pete. "Man, if I had a rod, I'd get that damn bill collector. He always taking my mama money for our bills. Don't they know that we don't die, we just multiply?" They all laughed and gave each other a high five. But Jim knew that Pete didn't have any heart. Not brave enough. So, instead of laughing with him, Jim and Chink, were laughing at him because they knew what up. As they walked away from Pete, they spotted a man in a gray suit, brown tie, driving by them. Wouldn't you know it, the man parked 10 feet in front of them as they were walking. Chink looked at Jim with an evil grin and they walked toward the man in the gray suit. He jumped out of his car looking nervous. He was about 5 feet, 9 inches, and a little overweight. His funny-looking curly afro was leaning to one side like he'd just woke up from sleeping in his car. Jim looked at Chink and said, "Better him than us." Then they both laughed. The man walked fast to a house, and then he knocked once, twice, 3 times and turned around. Jim and Chink stared him in the face as he stared down into the barrel of the gun. "Now boys, let's be reasonable," he said. And Chink said, "Ain't but 2 boys in this world." Jim said, "And that's farm boy or cowboy, and we ain't neither. So, you know what it is. Give it up." That moment the man reached in his pocket. Jim stuck the rod closer to his face and asked, "Now what?" The man pulled out 10s, 5s, and 1s. The dollar bills looked good to Chink as he grabbed them. "Turn around, boy," Jim said. The man's hands went up in the air higher as he turned around. "And don't turn back around, sucker," Jim said as him and Chink ran around the back way of that house they were standing at. As they bent the corner, the man hollered, "Help, help, help me please." Jim turned and fired 1 shot at the ground near the man. Then the man started banging on that house door. "Help, help, help me please." Bam, bam, bam on the door. Chink and Jim were ducking through alleyways, up the hill through the woods. And then they stopped near the end of the woods. Huffing and puffing sweat all over, they pulled their sweatshirts off. Their sleeveless undershirts were soaked and wet. As soon as they sat on a tree log to do that, mosquitoes started biting, stinging them. They took off like lightning toward Hector's house, to be safe from the mosquitoes. They forgot about the gray suit man, bill collector. Hector opened the door, they tiptoed up the stairs to Hector's room. Hector asked, "What up, man?" They both scratching like they had a bag of quinine, cut material for heroin. Hector asked, "What you doing, dope or something?" "Man, get me a wet towel." "Yeah man, make it hot." Jim and Chink scratching their tail off. When Hector returned with a wet towel, Jim grabbed it, rubbed his arms and neck with it and said, "Chink, count the goddamn money, man." Chink answered, "When you give me that damn towel I will." Jim laughed and threw him the towel. They took in $104 that time. Then they told Hector to go scoop for them while they take back the Rodsko to Jeff's house. They all agreed and left Hector's house. 2 youngsters with $52 apiece. It was a good score, take from robbery. Then they went to Jeff's apartment to return his rod and pay him for his Rodsko. Jim and Chink went from alley to alley, side street to side street to get to Jeff's apartment. Jeff answered the door in a slight nod, "Hey dudes, what's happening?" His girl hanging on his shoulder grinning from ear to ear. Chink said, "Smells like you are what happening, that weed smells good." His girl said, "It's Acapulco Gold, want some?" Jim said, "Let's take care of business." Then Jim handed Jeff his rod and $12. Jeff said, "Later man," and shut the door. Jim said, "Chink, have you noticed that chump never let us in his house when we come over here?" Chink answered, "I know Jim, and if I was him, I wouldn't let you in either." Ha ha ha. They both walked out of his building, went across the schoolyard swinging at each other and laughing while slap boxing. Walking back to L Banks Road, Chink checked in with his mom. "Hey mom, was up for dinner?" She said, "Too early to tell you yet, but, whatever I cook you gonna eat it." Jim laughed. Then she said, "And if you stay for dinner Jim, you gonna eat it too." They slid out the back door laughing. Guys choosing up sides for a crab apple battle. Willie said, "Y'all chumps too scared to play or what?" Chink threw up a middle finger as they all laughed. Going back around the schoolway they passed Jim's apartment building. In the parking lot was Jim's father working on his car. Jim asked, "Hey Pop, when you gonna get a new car?" His father lifted his head up from his Ford's car hood, and looked at Jim and said, "When you ever gonna buy me one, son?" Jim looked at him with a serious look and said, "Someday Pop, someday soon." His father shrugged his shoulders and shook his head, then disappeared back under the hood of the car. Chink said, "Now we are covered Jim, let's go get high." Jim said, "Yeah man, but just think. One day we gonna make big bucks off that stuff, but until then let's do it." They couldn't get to Hector's house fast enough. Hector had just stepped on his front porch when a whistle sounded from Jim's mouth. Hector looked up the block and there was Jim and Chink coming down the street. They party hardy that day, and then 2 weeks later it happened. A car of 4 deep, Oldsmobile, shark blue, guys were asking for little Mickey. Volunteered information came soon enough. Mickey the big brother, Jim is his little brother. As he was handed a bag of dope from out the car window. "Thanks man." The dude on the corner went back into a nod as he scratched his leg, and broke his mug down. The blue olds drove up to the next block and then the next. 3 dudes sitting on the curb, the blue olds went by and then stopped. Chink said, "We should have stopped by Jeff's crib and paid him for a rod this weekend." Hector said, "Man, then how was we gonna get high right now, huh? We'd be out there trying to stick up somebody man." Jim looked over at Hector and tried to hit him, but Chink was in the way. They all laughed. The olds backed up and stopped in front of them. The door swung open. Jim, Chink, and Hector's mouths hung opened wide. Their eyes were as big as a silver dollar piece. Their first thought was that Silky finally caught up with them. Jim whispered, "If it's Silky, split up and I'll meet you at Jeff's crib." They stood up and were ready to break for it. "Run, little Mickey!" someone called out from the car. Jim said, "Yeah, my name ain't no little Mickey." As he began to stand up, "And what you want with him?" a voice said from the back seat of the car. "Man, I know it's you, come on, get in the car." That was their cue to roll out, but Jim looked at them and nodded for them to stand still cause the voice wasn't threatening. A red light shined as the back door opened up. Hector and Chink couldn't tell who the two faces were in the back seat. As Jim looked over at his crew, he winked his eye and balled up his fist. Then they all were standing there ready to jump the first person, cause if they had a gun they would have been shot by now. The guy on the side with the door opened, and stepped out. And they had their fight plan ready. Because, they were not going out like no chumps.
Brothers and sisters, remember the old man Blisters. He worked hard all day, he worked hard all night. Don't let the drug gang take you in tight. Lift up your head, hold it up high, high. We need your love in order to survive. Cause on my block kids are selling dope, 11, 12, and 13. Some say their manhood will never be seen. Try to talk to them, you look like you're crazy. Some to get flew to, and some are just lazy. They leave their young girlfriend for habits of babies. To be behind bars is just plain crazy. Doing drugs in the street and not enough to eat. They lie and steal, it's no big deal. Brothers and sisters, remember the old man Blisters. He worked hard all day, he worked hard all night. Don't let the drug gang take you in tight.